Well, to understand the turmoil in Israel and where this may be heading, you have to go back to some key points in history and see how they all tie together. Let's start with the formation of Israel in 1948 and what had been British-controlled Palestine. Back then, Israel intended to craft and pass a written constitution to govern it, but never did. So if there's ever a constitutional crisis, there is no written constitution to sort it out. That's one issue. And now let's fast forward to 1967. In the Six-Day War, Israel captured land from Arab nations, including the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and Israeli settlers started moving into those occupied regions to sharp UN opposition, which exists to this day.
Settlements in the Palestinian territory, in the occupied Palestinian territory, are not legally valid and constitute a flagrant violation of international law.
Well, the Israeli settlers and Palestinians clashed, and those clashes are growing more intense as more settlers move in. Now, in the 1990s, President Clinton negotiated the Oslo Accords, in which Palestinians control some areas and Israelis control others. But after Israeli settlers were forced out of Gaza in 2005, it accelerated Israeli settlements into the West Bank, which Palestinians see as a way to squeeze them out there. And that created an ongoing conflict and violence that really took off last year and then accelerated at the end of December when Benjamin Netanyahu and his right-wing pro-settler coalition gained power in Israel's Knesset, or parliament. Among other things, the governing coalition stepped up raids and home demolitions in Palestinian towns in search of terrorists.
We are striking the terrorists with strength and determination.
And that sparked more deadly violence with the Palestinians and condemnation from the United Nations.
In the occupied West Bank, excessive use of force and unlawful killings of Palestinians by the Israeli security forces have increased, including apparent extrajudicial killings.
And that triggered protests from Israeli centrists who say the right-wing coalition is going too far, while the coalition has said it hasn't gone far enough.
This is just the first step. It's not by no means the last action that we will take.
And in Israel, there is only one other branch of government to check the power of that governing coalition in the Knesset, and that would be the judicial branch. And that's because Israel's Knesset only has one chamber, not two like our Congress, and its executive and legislative branches are effectively fused as one. And with only the courts to stand in their way, the right-wing coalition is now revoking power of the courts, which is fueling the protests.
Is that the people won't have it. The separation of authorities is critical to the existence of democracy.
But as Netanyahu and his allies see it, reeling in the power of unelected judges is critical to democracy. So they just passed a law stating the court cannot block them from doing things the court finds unreasonable. And they also plan to restrict the Supreme Court's power to strike down laws they pass and give that majority coalition power to overrule the Supreme Court. And at the same time, within the right-wing coalition, there are bills to do some things that the court would likely try to challenge, like exempting the ultra-Orthodox from mandatory military service and annexing the West Bank. And at the same time, the Netanyahu coalition wants to restructure the Supreme Court in such a way that they would have majority say over who serves on it. And Netanyahu happens to be facing bribery, breach of trust, and fraud charges in an ongoing trial. So protesters fear that Netanyahu may also be seeking more power over the courts to help him in his corruption trial by adding potentially sympathetic judges to the bench.
Feel very sad. I feel very big disappointment from our government.
And if the court strikes down any of the coalition's reforms, you'd get that constitutional crisis in which two branches claim to have powers over each other that they don't accept, again, with no written constitution to sort it out. And that's why Israel is now rocked by protest and at a turning point in history that's playing out as we speak.